Welcome to Programmable, where we talk to tech luminaries to help you with your career. Programmable is brought to you by JDoodle, the AI coding suite for learning and building together. I'm Lucas Hakewill, and in today's episode, we are speaking with Dr. Silvia Pfeiffer. Silvia is founder of CoView, an Australian telehealth company that supports over 100,000 clinicians and 10 million patients. She's a software engineer with decades of experience in computer science methods for transporting audio and video on the web. Recently, she stepped back from her CEO role, and today, you hear the inside story. Welcome, Silvia.
Thanks for having me.
To start with, Silvia, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yes, so you've already summarized a number of things. I'm originally from Germany, so apologies for my accent. Even after 25 years in Australia, it's still very hard to get rid of my origins. But yeah, I've really enjoyed my whole career in Australia. I came right after doing my PhD and joined the CSIRO. I worked on research projects, automated captioning and metadata analysis and, interesting things around the web. I got more interested in video on the web very quickly because my work centered around captioning and accessibility. And after that, I became involved with writing standards. With the W3C, I've been involved in writing some of the accessibility standards, the WebVTT standard, and also parts of the HTML5 specification. And by doing all of that, I saw the need for scalability with video. We built our first video search engine at CSIRO, which I spun out in a company called Sequence. It was, probably the wrong country to do this in, but we had a lot of interesting work happening there. And later I became involved with the WebRTC standard, so the streaming video on the web standards. And this time around, I wanted to really create a company that would take good advantage of video on the web, the video streaming, live streaming video on the web, and together with the team at CSIRO, which I was working for again at that time, we developed the base technology for CoView and spun CoView out of the CSIRO in 2018.
Wow, it's such an interesting journey, Silvia. I'm really excited to dive into it. Can you, just to begin with, can you explain what is the CSIRO and what does it mean to spin out a company from an organization?
Yeah, very good point. The CSIRO is the Commonwealth's Scientific and Industrial Research Organization, so Australia's biggest government-funded research organization, and they work in all sorts of fields, oceans, the astronomy, beetles, flora, fauna, and technology. And I was working in the Department of Mathematics and in Computer Science. I think it's called something else now, but those departments, they change from time to time. And later, I actually worked for NICTA, which is the National Information in Computer Technology. Can't remember what A stood for, but it merged back into CSIRO, so it all became part of the CSIRO later again as well. And so in this research organization, I actually joined because I had done a PhD and I was going to do fundamental research. I realized that a lot of that research ended up on a shelf and was never used practically, and that frustrated me immensely. So I really wanted to work towards creating new technology and turning it into something that would be used by the industry. And so taking technology and turning it into a startup is called spinning out, because you're spinning the technology out of the organization into another organization. And that can be done through licensing or through what I asked for, a attribution of the technology to that company. So an assignment of the technology. And both are ways in which you can create technology in a research organization. That could also be a university. It doesn't need to be the CSIRO. And using that technology to create a new company.
So you were able to take the results of some fundamental research, some what some might term kind of blue sky or exploratory research, and turn it into something really concrete that you were able to build a company around.
Yes, that's exactly what spinning out means. Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about CoView?
Yes, so CoView stands for collaborative viewing. And what we built is effectively a video conferencing platform. But the video conferencing platform is specifically targeted at healthcare. Was right from the spin-out stage. We wanted to help telehealth become a common capability in the Australian healthcare system. It was being talked about for 20, 30 years with diverse types of software solutions. But we knew there were some obstacles. Some of the obstacles were that the internet wasn't good enough. So there wasn't enough bandwidth around, that the software wasn't good enough, and that the reimbursements that weren't there, that clinicians weren't really paid for doing telehealth. And all of those things were changing at the time that we created CoView. So I thought it would have a future. And we worked really hard to make the technology as seamless as possible for the clinicians, as safe and secure as possible, and as easy to use. And the ease to use came with the video technology on the web that I was helping to standardize. So we created CoView as a telehealth software platform, and we would get clinicians onto our software platform to help them deliver care remotely. And we did this, as I mentioned, in 2018. We spun out of the CSIRO. By 2019, we had a contract with a large government organization, Health Direct. And in 2020, the pandemic hit, and suddenly the government made telehealth Medicare items available for everybody. And that then created the adoption that you talked about. Over 10 million consultations delivered and 100,000 clinicians using our platform. And we're now also expanding into the US. So I think it's a pretty nice success story of a technology company being spun out of a research organization and solving a specific problem for our country.
With startups, we often think about tailwinds or headwinds. What are the things that will stop you? A headwind that will slow you down, or a tailwind that might speed you up. So the pandemic was obviously a huge tailwind for CoView, but it sounds like even before then, as you were spinning out, as you were identifying healthcare as your market to take your technology to, it sounds like there were some changes happening in the market that you felt like now was the time to bring a telehealth company into the world. How did you spy that opportunity?
That is a very, very difficult thing to do. And CoView actually teetered on the edge of not being able to survive just before the pandemic, because there were a lot of demands on our technology. We knew we had to develop a lot of capabilities, a lot of features, yet the adoption curve was very low, very slow, because there was only a couple of Medicare items that were available for reimbursement. So the biggest one was what was it called now? It was about supporting patients in rural and remote areas with mental health support. And there were Medicare items for that support. There wasn't really reimbursements for people doing it for GPs, right, and other areas. So mental health was the only area where we could really create a big adoption, and a little bit through the NDIS, because the NDIS requires people to choose their own way of how they receive care. So patients would choose telehealth as one delivery mechanism, and some clinicians were offering those services. So those are the areas that we went after. But that meant that we were only chasing allied health professionals, and allied health professionals in a specific, small target space that were willing to deliver into rural and remote. And so we thought we had made quite some inroads there before the pandemic. We were doing 400 consultations a day, which was quite substantial already, and compared favorably to some of the telehealth programs that were being run by whole states. West Australia had its telehealth program. Every state in Australia had its telehealth program, and they were delivering from hospitals, whereas we were giving these tools to private practitioners. And so it was difficult to break through this. You're talking about a headwind. We found it very difficult to break through this headwind at the time where there were very limited amounts of financial reimbursements for clinicians to deliver telehealth. Now, the pandemic was that tailwind that we needed that would change all of that. And with the the creation of these new Medicare items, the government created those in the early days of the pandemic in March 2020. Everything was opened up. The whole market was opened up, and we saw an increase, a manifold increase from 400 consultations a day to 25,000 within 2 weeks. So you can imagine what stress that was on our technology environment and on our customer support team. And so that stress, living through that stress and supporting the success that came out of that stress was quite an experience. Probably, the most interesting experience of my whole life.
I can't even imagine, Silvia. And I don't have to, because I'm speaking to you. So I guess I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about, okay, we've gone from this period of like
pushing
you say,
the barrel up the hill.
A headwind, pushing a barrel up a hill, 400 consults per day, feeling great, but this is tough, and the state and federal health systems are not wanting to reimburse clinicians for taking telehealth appointments, so they're out of pocket if they're doing telehealth. Tell us about those days in March 2020 where in 2 weeks you massively increased that number of consultations.
It's a bit of a blur, but because I got very little sleep during that time. It would start very early in the morning at like 6 o'clock and would go till midnight. And sometimes I would get up at 6 in the morning, and by 8 o'clock at night, I would realize, I would look at my watch and go, oh, I haven't eaten anything yet, because I was so busy dealing with everything. It was pretty crazy times, but it was effectively 2 to 3 weeks that were the crux of it, where we were going from such low numbers to high numbers. When the Medicare items were announced, effectively, that was on a Friday before a weekend. And that whole weekend, my husband and I had actually planned to go on a holiday, and we canceled it because it was not possible. We got so many requests from clinicians that were just calling us and said, our industry association recommended to use your FEAR platform because it's a secure platform and built for telehealth, and we don't know of any other platform. How do we get onto it? What do we do now in order to use your platform? And we got this question over and over and over again. And so we had actually, fortunately enough, we had a scalable setup already. We had set up our support through Intercom as a text-based interface. So a lot of questions came in through those text questions from our website. We got a lot of phone calls from clinicians. At the beginning, we actually had to put most of those phone calls on a call system, like they were just recorded, and we would respond at a later time. And a number of emails were coming in as well. So the first thing I did on the Monday after all of this happened was to hire people and into the support team. And funnily enough, because we were in a co-working space, there were a lot of other founders that had seen their startups basically wiped off the face of the earth through the pandemic. They could not talk to customers. They could not do anything. So they were closing down their businesses. And we picked up all these people that had technology background and set them up on our support line to help customers. They didn't need much training. It was effectively, I said, can you help your grandmother on a phone to set up their computer? If you're capable of doing that, then you're capable of working for us. That was sort of the level of quality that I was looking for. And so we hired 20 people within 2 weeks. And, you know, the first 2 that we hired, I trained, and then they were training the next 2, etc. It was just going bang, 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 hiring one after the other. That's the support side of the company. At the same time, by us bringing in all these new clinicians that were using the platform, on the technology front, we had massive problems as well, because before that we were dealing with maybe 1,000 clinicians, and suddenly we were bringing on 50,000 clinicians within 2 weeks, something like that. And that created a load on our platform, on our software platform, that we thought we would have enough time over, maybe 6 to 12 months to deal with all the problems that brings up. But we were identifying problems such as a front-end piece of software that was continuously hitting the back end for information at a high frequency. And so the back end was effectively DDoSed by our explosion of front-end users. So we were DDoSing ourselves. DDoS is a denial of service attack, which means that a backend is getting so many requests that it can't deal with them, and it shuts down so that it can't respond to the requests on the front end anymore. Those technology users that are listening here either probably know about DDoS, or you might want to look it up. It's one of the core principles of web technology. Anyway, that was fun to, we would chuck along nicely. People would be using our platform, and suddenly it would just fail because the backend just suddenly went down. And then we had the biggest problem with our customer support end, because we would take all these calls from angry customers and we would have to inform everybody that we were just down. And then at the same time, my co-founder, who was looking after the backend, the technology backend, he would be frantically trying to fix the problems, trying to scale up the servers that we had, because we set everything up in AWS in a scalable fashion. So we would just throw bigger hardware at it very quickly, as much as we could, to make this work. And then that would give them enough time to actually debug the problems and fix the problems in a release overnight. We would then have new software, and the next morning that wouldn't have that problem anymore. I must say, my co-founder, he's brilliant software engineer, and he would usually identify the problem very quickly and fix it so that by the next day we would not have that same problem anymore. We would then find other problems, right? So just like every other video conferencing platform in the world, Google's Google Meet, Teams, Zoom, everyone during the time of the pandemic had an outage. We had a number of outages as well, and we soldiered on. We went through it. We worked very hard, with releases at 2 a.m. in the morning to get things up and going. But we got through it, and we supported our new customers, and we really scaled up massively.
It's a high stakes environment in which to be fixing bugs.
It was crazy. Yeah. There's no bigger pressure than a pandemic with a lot of new users, and you just do away with sleep for a while.
So I imagine that period was simultaneously a high point of adrenaline, as well as probably a bit of a low point of exhaustion or burnout. Can you tell me a bit about some of the high points at CoView for you? What are you proud of?
I would say our highest point was actually managing that scale up through the pandemic. That was impressive. It was amazing how we as a team came together, both in the technology side and on the business side. That was an absolute high point. And another high point was for us how we managed to transfer the energy that we'd created through that scale up, because it was exhilarating for everybody, right? Everybody in the company felt this growth, and we transformed the company from 7 people that we had before the pandemic to 25 within 2 weeks, and from that point, when our customers had now learned how to use the platform, etc. So our customer support team wasn't working so hard anymore. We didn't need 15 people that were waiting for calls from customers anymore. So I had to think about what to do with these 15 people. And we were now actually a company. We weren't just a small little startup that was trying to survive. It wasn't just 7 people trying to make it work. It was actually 25 people that were running a business that needed to become a proper structured organization. And I was, as soon as that whole problem phase was over and we were chugging along nicely, I thought about how to transform this random collection of people that we had hired in a rush into an actual business, into departments, etc. So I was, and I've got a double degree in business management and computer science. So I actually loved the part in my career where at university I was learning about organizational design, what it would take to run an organization, how to structure an organization, etc. So I interviewed every single one of our people that we had hired in a rush about their aspirations and their goals in life, what they would want to do in their careers, etc. And I sat down with them and I figured out which department would be most appropriate for them. So we needed a marketing department, we needed salespeople, we needed customer support, we needed administrative people, HR, finance, we needed product team, we needed to structure our engineering team into different groups and create the right processes around the software engineering. So we wanted to adopt, and we didn't have this before the pandemic. We were just 4 software engineers that were working through a spreadsheet of bugs effectively. We were using something like a Kanban board just to get through our bugs. Now we wanted to transform into an agile organization and bring in agile processes in software engineering. And so all of these changes came right after the pandemic. So we structured it into different squads, so into software engineering squads, and we created all these other departments. And so I interviewed every single staff member about where they would fit best. And some of these people that I hired that were support people became product managers. Some of them became marketing people. Some of them became HR manager, or even one person became our finance manager. So, everybody had different aspirations in where they wanted to take their careers. And for the majority of people, we were actually able to give them a great start into their careers because they were all very young people. And that worked very well by keeping most of the people that we had hired in a rush through the pandemic. What we didn't have was managers because they were all fairly young people, inexperienced in the fields that we were putting in. So what we had to fill in or hire next were this middle tier of managers on top of all of these different departments. So we hired a manager in marketing, somebody with experience in marketing, a product lead, and several more experienced senior software engineers as well that could manage their squads, and just actually turned it into a proper organization. And that's where it started being a business that could run without the founders, because at some point that's where you want to get to.
So Silvia, it sounds like that chaotic period of scale for CoView, and maybe by analogy to any startup where they might be hiring quickly. You're not entirely sure what roles you might need. Things are in flux, and then you're able to settle into a more of a clear organizational design. It sounds like that represented a really great opportunity for the early career people in your team. I'm curious to know, I suppose, for the students or early career people listening here who might be interested in working in a startup on interesting technical problems, what advice might you have for them as part of that search?
It's a really good question. We started hiring people straight out of university actually quite early on. Our first staff, our first employee, who is still around today, was a software engineer that we hired right out of university. And he joined my very experienced co-founder in the engineering team, and he learned a lot about our platform. He's now one of our most insightful people across our code base, because he had to work across all of the different areas in our code base. And he learned a lot just by being one of the first employees in the startup. So I think as a early career person, it can be very interesting to join such a small team, because you actually get to see a lot of the breadth and complications of building a new technology platform. And you learn a lot of things. Whereas if you join a large organization where everything's already there, you're effectively just a bug fixer. You go in and there's a bug here and there's a bug there, and you don't get to develop a lot of new features typically. Whereas in a startup, you're creating technology from scratch and you're part of it, and you learn a lot from the people in the business. The downside of working in a startup is that startups can't give you all the training that you might still be needing. So we hired somebody else who was very early in their career as well as a software engineer, and they didn't. The basics just weren't there. So we needed to hire a certain level of competency that was required for us to be able to work in the team. But at the same time, we also knew that competency would be something that we would need to lift up, right? Learning about all of our stack of technology on the back end and the front end, etc. So if you are very early in your career and you haven't got any experience with coding and with how a project runs, I would recommend working for a larger organization. But if you are, if you've worked coded for a long time, you've maybe written your own projects, etc., I think you would be ready and really welcome in a startup that is early on and that can use software engineers early in their career and really uplift their knowledge. And you can become a really core part of the team as well and stick around for a very long time, which often also means in a startup that you get options. You get options in the company, which turn later into shares, and means when the company exits, the company gets sold, you actually get some benefit out of having contributed to building the company. So this is one of the upsides that you get by working in a startup.
Fantastic, Silvia. Some great upsides there. And you mentioned, you had some hires that didn't work out. Are there any I suppose, anti-patterns for success, or, modes of behavior or attributes about someone that indicates that maybe they're not quite right for a startup?
That's also a very good question. Students or people that join a startup need to be almost behaving like a founder. So somebody that joins a startup needs to have the same kind of drive that the founders have in making this technology successful, making the business successful, and helping the business where they can. You can't be saying, okay, I'm a front-end developer, and I only do HTML, markup or whatever it is. I won't do anything else on the side. I'm solely focused on doing this one thing. if you're working in a startup, often you need to be doing things that are outside your competency. You learn new things. You need to self-educate. You need to do some research. You need to work on things you've never done before. And you need to be kind of a bit self-motivated in doing those kinds of things, because there's not enough people around to help you with every single little step. So, if you're that kind of person, you're really singularly suited to startups. If you're somebody who wants to be focused and become an expert in a very narrow slice of technology, you're probably looking for a larger organization where you can actually gel and be that specialist that goes deep in one particular area and becomes the expert in that one particular area. And get support from everybody else for everything else. So there's a lot of flexibility required to work in a startup.
Really being able to be a self-starter, to not have all of the support that you might have at a bigger organization.
Absolutely. And go with the flow, maybe even contribute to creating structures, in inventing processes, helping create introduce new technology, all those kinds of things. If you're that kind of, innovation seeker, you're in a good place.
Fantastic. Silvia, you talked about being an expert in a narrow field, and you've lived that in a way, being a researcher and moving to being co-founder of two startups. What's the switch like for you from a purely technical or research focused role to then exploring all of the breadth of what's required of a CEO?
That's a big challenge. So my first startup that I contributed to, I was actually the CTO. I knew I couldn't be the CEO because I had never built a business in Australia and didn't know what was necessary to do. Also, I was still very much, a software engineer and a research scientist and looking at at the innovative aspects. The first startup didn't go so well. Let's be honest. And I think I'm putting it down to me wanting to create technology because I thought that technology was necessary in the market, but I didn't actually communicate with customers much because I thought that as a technologist, I didn't need to talk to the customers. I would just build the technology and my co-founder would do everything else. That is absolutely the wrong thing to do in a startup. You can only build technology and solutions if you talk to your customers. I went through an accelerator once and they actually said, if you haven't talked to at least 100 potential customers, you don't understand your market. And that's very true. You need to talk to the people that would ultimately buy your product. And you need to listen to what their needs are, what their problems are, and then build the technology around that, not around what you think the market needs. And so that was one of the biggest challenges, which I learned very thoroughly in my first startup. In the second startup, we did the other way around. We actually worked with clinicians and only built what the clinicians told us what was necessary. And so we had a whole advisory board of clinicians, which we talked to at the beginning, which told us the kinds of things that wouldn't be needed in the industry. And once we had a number of customers, we started talking more intensively with our customers and built the technology with those clinicians for CoView. And that was very important. So when I created CoView, I knew much more. I understood much better what I was needing to do as a CEO. But I still had a lot of things to learn. So about the financial side, how to use Xero and how to do accounting. That was something I did by myself at the beginning. About the legal side of things, how to incorporate the organization, how to set up contracts with our staff, and those kinds of things. I had to learn those things. I feel I'm like a little bit of a lawyer. By now, I've read so many legal contracts that I can actually spot problems myself, which is actually very important when you're in a startup, because legal costs can be quite high. So if you can do the first run through a contract and already identify all the key issues that you want fixed, then you can reduce the costs that the lawyers will have, because you can communicate better with the lawyers what need to be fixed, and that reduces the work of the lawyers. So the legal side of things had to be sorted. Hiring is something that I find continuously challenging, hiring the right people. And I had to learn to go with my gut feeling. If I felt in an interview that the person was not a good match, even though they looked on paper as though they had everything we needed, they were ticking all the boxes. At the beginning, I would ignore my gut feeling and say, they have everything we need, we should hire them. But this gut feeling always turned out to be right. They wouldn't be a good match to our culture, the way we would work. They wouldn't understand when I explained something because we spoke different languages, etc. So you got to learn how to hire. That's also very important. And so there were a lot of capabilities I needed to learn. I call the CEO in a startup the chief everything officer, because you got to do everything, everything that nobody else is doing. And if that means taking out the trash at the end of the day out of your office because nobody else is in the office, that's what it is. You take care of pulling everything together. And slowly over time, as you grow the team, areas that you had focused on as a founder, you will hand off to other people. And so then other people can take care of sales, support, marketing, etc. So, but at the beginning, you need to do everything yourself.
And so this ownership mindset that a startup employee has to bring is extended even more so for the CEO or the founder.
Oh, massively so, yes. And I at the beginning I was a bit hesitant to do things like I wouldn't know how to hire a person. So I would go to an expert and I would pay somebody to help me do this, etc. But you learn over time, and you also learn that it's not about being perfect at the beginning. You manage your risk and you are much more able to accept higher risk at the beginning. If you don't get the first employment contract that you have completely correct, and you use a default from a standard contract from somebody else, that's completely okay. It doesn't matter. You will learn over time what clauses need to go in there, whether a 4-week, a 6-week, or an 8-week period is the right period before of payment, before somebody leaves, whatever. All these details will come over time, and you will find the right balance for your business. Don't sweat the details too much at the beginning. Just get things done. You will improve over time. And that was something I had to really learn. I'm a software engineer, and as a scientist, you try to be an expert and you try to do things the right way. You sometimes got to get over your shadow there and just get things done rather than getting them done perfectly.
So done is better than perfect in many cases in the early stages.
Always, yes.
Silvia, we spoke about the highs are high, the lows are low with a startup. Tell me about some times where it was really difficult or awful, either at CoView or at your first startup.
The first years of CoView were very hard. It took me a long time to get CoView set up to spin out of the CSRO, because that required me to have an agreement with the CSRO around how to take the technology out, and then raise capital. And capital raising was grueling. It took a very long time to get investment, and we needed the investment. We had so much technology to develop before we could really scale our customers, that we needed the investment to do it. If you build a business that doesn't need investment, I would always recommend doing that, because if you can bootstrap a company, you're in full control of everything that happens, and you can fund your business from your customers. That's perfect. a lot of technology companies can't. They have to get a lot of investment first to build the technology before they can get a first customer. And so that was where we were. And I couldn't convince VCs that telehealth had found its time, that it was time to build a telehealth platform and that would be scalable and that would actually have success in Australia, because they'd seen it for 20 years that continuously there would be telehealth companies that were created and that would fail because it wasn't its time yet. So the first 2 years were very hard up until 2020 when the pandemic hit. Before the pandemic, I almost couldn't get investment. And then the pandemic hit and every single VC in the country tried to call me when I was in the middle of scaling this up, getting support to customers, making the platform stable, etc. And then the VCs wanted to talk to me finally after I had knocked on their doors for 2 years. And so I had to pause them. I had to actually get help from our board, existing board members. And say, could somebody on my board please take care of the investors and just tell them to hold off a little while until I can pay attention to them and we get through this first onslaught of adoption, because I just simply don't have the time for them right now. So we got through the first 2 months and then I started looking at, I created a pitch deck and I went back to all these VCs that wanted to invest. And we closed around that year. So it was, that was the time of telehealth and that was when everybody wanted to invest. And sometimes that's what it takes. You push the barrel up the hill with your startup and every day you think, am I still doing the right thing? Should I shut this down? Is this going to go anywhere? I honestly, I had so many nights where I was lying awake at night thinking about whether I should shut it down or whether I should continue pushing the barrel up the hill. And that all changed with the pandemic. And sometimes that's what it takes. Your time isn't quite there yet. You're building something that is going to happen and that there will be a success at some point, but the time isn't there yet. And you just keep pushing through. It's that persistence that sometimes is necessary for your company to become a success. But it was very hard, really, really tough.
It feels like such a beautiful illustration of the idea of luck being so reliant in some cases on hard work and preparation. CoView was only lucky from the pandemic because of where you were, where you'd got to, all of the hard work that had gone in to begin with. And so this really challenging period coming before the pandemic, and then, okay, the rocket fuel that comes. It's such a wild journey with CoView.
Timing was right. And sometimes you just got to get the timing right. Yes.
And so you backed something that you believed in and you got the timing right.
Yes.
You've recently stepped away from your role as CEO. What does this next chapter look like for you?
I was able to step back as CEO because we got the company to a mature stage. And we've now hired a professional CEO who can take the company to the next level. It doesn't need my persistence and, tenacity that the company needed at the start and the creation of the organization anymore. I enjoy and like these early days of an organization, creating something from nothing, where you're effectively imagining everything in your mind about what the future looks like and what the organization in that future looks like. And it kind of feels you get there and you achieve it and you go, what now? What now? How are you going to grow next? And so my goal after that was, okay, we've done it in Australia. Now we'll go to the US. And I seeded all of these, the basics. Pardon me. I seeded the basics for the next part of growth of CoView. And I was able to hand that over to the CEO because running an international business requires different capabilities that I feel I'm not really best suited to. So this is the right time for me to step back, get a bit of respite, recover from this wild ride, and think about where I can put my effort next. I'm looking for the next challenge where I can make a difference, and I want to stay in healthcare and technology. So I think where I'll end up is somewhere around the new interoperability standards that are being created in healthcare right now around FHIR, FHIR, which is an interoperability standard that is being adopted in Australia right now. And I think it will be the basis of the future of our healthcare system in Australia. I think it will have a huge impact on how we run healthcare. And I want to think this through. So I'll take some time to actually think through what impact this technology will have on the structure of our future healthcare system. And that includes, what changes are necessary to Medicare and the reimbursements. We will have different challenges than we had when Medicare was introduced. It'll go from, having a healthcare system that is targeted at acute challenges, when somebody breaks their arm and things like that. Those are acute incidents of healthcare, to more chronic areas of healthcare, people that have heart conditions and other such chronic things. And so we're not dealing very well with chronic diseases yet. And however, the majority of our healthcare cost is in chronic diseases. So our healthcare system will have to change. And technology has a huge role to play in making that change happen. And that's what I want to think through and where I want to help with this transition of our healthcare system. So I'm not sure yet what it will look like. I just know what area I am passionate about and where I want to work. And I've got to figure out how to make this happen, what technology needs to be built to support the future of our healthcare system.
It's a really exciting opportunity for change. Silvia, a lot of our listeners are probably facing similar introspective moments, thinking about what domain do I want to apply my skills, my programming skills. What do you see as some of the interesting or critical problems for programmers to solve?
The interesting part about being a software engineer and a programmer is that your skills are useful in every aspect of our lives these days, in every industry, everywhere. So I would go like I'm doing right now, go in yourself and figure out where your passion is. If your passion is in changing the way that that we eat because we are eating too much meat, and the future of our world is not going to be able to be sustained from meat products. We need to think about other ways of delivering enough food to feed the exploding population that we continue to have. Then there will be companies that are in this space that need software to support the way that this industry is working. If your passion is in environments, and honestly, if I wasn't in healthcare, I would probably look at the environment, because our environment is not in a good state. Effectively, we've overpopulated the planet, and we have to think about how we can maintain our planet from an ecological point of view, from a global warming point of view, climate change, etc. Like in this space, there's a lot to do as well, and software will have a vital part to play in making those changes. If you're passionate about, exploring space or satellites, there's so many areas where you can make a difference. Go in yourself and think about where your passion is, and where you see the biggest problems of the future of humanity, effectively, because there's a lot of challenges that we have at the moment, where there will be the next 20, 30 years of research and innovation happening. And that's where I would put my focus. Pick one of those areas, find a company or create a company, create a technology, and support that transition.
find an opportunity to make, to use technology to make the change that you want to see in the world.
That's a very good way of summarizing it. Thank you.
Silvia, it's been such an absolute pleasure talking to you. I've loved hearing about your journey as a programmer, a researcher, and a multi-time founder. If our audience wants to keep in touch and keep an eye on what you're doing next, how can they best hear about that?
I'm very public with what I do. So if you follow me on LinkedIn, you can connect. I'm quite open to connecting with everybody. You can reach out to me there, and you can watch what I'm doing. I've recently posted 2 articles, one on the creation of CoView, and the other one on the transition that I'm making, stepping back as CEO from CoView. I'll continue publishing articles there. So if you're curious at what I'm doing, and if you are interested in healthcare, it certainly is another one of those challenging areas of our times. You can read my articles there.
I can't wait to see what you do next. Silvia Pfeiffer, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on the Programmable podcast.
It's been a pleasure talking with you, and I look forward to seeing what this community can create.
Thank you, Silvia. And for listeners, you can follow Programmable on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to JDoodle's newsletter so that you get the best stories from tech luminaries like Silvia right into your inbox. I've been Lucas Hakewill. Hope you enjoyed the episode.